The morning fog rolled across San Francisco Bay like a gray blanket, muffling the sounds of the bustling waterfront. Dr. Sarah Chun adjusted her telescope for what felt like the 100th time, trying to get a clear view of the migrating gray whales she'd been tracking for her marine biology research. The observation deck of the Marin Headlands Research Station was usually her sanctuary, a place where the only drama involved tide pools and whale song patterns. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But today felt different. Sarah had arrived at 5:30 a.m., as she did every Tuesday and Thursday during migration season. The routine was sacred to her coffee in her thermos, field notebook with yesterday's entries still drying from morning dew, and her father's old binoculars hanging around her neck like a talisman. At 28, she'd spent the last 4 years documenting whale migration patterns for the Pacific Marine Research Institute, work that required patience, precision, and an almost meditative calm, the kind of calm that was about to be shattered completely. She was adjusting the focus on a particularly active pod when she noticed the boat. It wasn't unusual to see vessels in the bay, fishing boats, tourist charters, Coast Guard cutters, but this one moved with purpose. No meandering, no stopping to fish. It cut through the water in a straight line toward the rocky outcropping. Below her position, Sarah lowered her binoculars and checked her watch. 6:47 a.m. Early, even for the most dedicated fisherman. She lifted the binoculars again, this time focusing on the approaching vessel. It was smaller than she'd initially thought, maybe 30 feet, with what looked like sophisticated communications equipment mounted on the cabin roof. Not exactly a weekend pleasure craft. The boat disappeared behind a cluster of jagged rocks that jutted out from the shoreline like broken teeth. Sarah waited, expecting it to emerge on the other side, but minutes passed with no sign of it. She scanned the water methodically, the way her research had trained her to do, checking every possible angle. Nothing. A prickle of unease ran down her spine. Boats didn't just vanish, especially not in waters she knew as well as her own backyard. She'd been coming to this spot for 4 years, long enough to know every current, every hidden inlet, every place where the fog could play tricks on your eyes. She was reaching for her radio to call the Coast Guard when she heard footsteps on the gravel path behind her. Heavy boots moving with deliberate precision across the loose stones. Sarah turned, expecting to see a fellow researcher or maybe a park ranger making early morning rounds. Instead, she found herself face to face with a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a military recruitment poster. He was tall, probably 6'2", with the kind of build that suggested countless hours of functional training rather than gym posing. His hair was regulation short, sandy brown with threads of premature gray at the temples. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, pale blue, constantly scanning, taking in details she probably didn't even notice about her own surroundings. He wore civilian clothes, but everything about his posture screamed military. Dark jeans, black tactical boots, a navy blue windbreaker that probably cost more than her monthly research budget. Most telling was the way he held himself, like a coiled spring ready to react to threats she couldn't even imagine. "Dr. Chun?" His voice was quiet, controlled. Not unfriendly, but not exactly warm either. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to the radio clipped to her belt. "Do I know you?" "My name is Marcus Wade. I need to ask you some questions about what you've observed this morning." The formal introduction did nothing to ease her growing anxiety. "I'm sorry, but who are you exactly? Are you with the Park Service? The Coast Guard?" Marcus glanced toward the water, then back at her. "I'm with a federal task force investigating suspicious maritime activity in this area. We have reason to believe you may have witnessed something significant." Sarah's mind raced. The boat that had disappeared. The sophisticated equipment. Her morning routine apparently wasn't as private as she'd thought. "How did you know I was?" Here, you maintain a very consistent schedule, Dr. Chun. Tuesday and Thursday mornings. Arrival time between 5:25 and 5:35 a.m. You stay for approximately 3 hours, documenting whale migration patterns for the Pacific Marine Research Institute. The level of detail in his response sent a chill through her. Someone had been watching her, studying her patterns, learning her habits. Have you been surveilling me? We've been monitoring this location. You happen to be a regular presence. Here. Marcus stepped closer, and Sarah noticed he moved without making any sound on the gravel. What did you see this morning? Any unusual vessels? Sarah hesitated. Every instinct told her to be careful, to think before speaking. She was a scientist, trained to observe and document, not to get involved in whatever federal investigation this man represented. But the boat had been real. She'd seen it clearly through her binoculars. There was a boat, she said finally. About 30 feet, white hull, came from the southeast around 6:45. It had communication equipment, more sophisticated than typical recreational craft. Marcus nodded, pulling out a small device that looked like a cross between a phone and a tactical radio. Did you observe where it went? It disappeared behind the rock formation to the south. I waited for it to emerge, but it never did. How long did you wait? Maybe 10 minutes. Long enough to know it didn't continue on any normal course. Marcus spoke quietly into his device, words Sarah couldn't quite catch. When he finished, he looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. Dr. Chun, I need you to understand something. What you witnessed this morning is part of a larger operation. There are people on that boat who pose a significant threat to national security. Sarah felt the fog around them growing thicker, or maybe it was just her imagination. What kind of threat? The kind that requires immediate federal response. Marcus glanced at his watch, then back toward the water. They're not fishing enthusiasts, and they're not researchers like yourself. They're here for a very specific purpose, and that purpose puts civilian lives at risk. The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy blanket. Sarah had spent her career studying creatures that lived their entire lives below the surface, in a world most people never saw. She was comfortable with the unknown, with mysteries that took years to unravel. But this was different. This was immediate and dangerous and completely outside her expertise. What do you need from me? She asked. Marcus reached into his windbreaker and pulled out what looked like a high-end spotting scope, much more sophisticated than anything in her research arsenal. I need your eyes, Dr. Chun. You know this coastline better than anyone on my team. You understand the patterns, the hiding spots, the places where someone might think they're invisible. He handed her the scope, and she was surprised by its weight. What exactly am I looking for? Movement. Heat signatures. Anything that suggests human activity in areas where there shouldn't be any. Marcus pointed toward the rocky outcropping where the boat had disappeared. They're still down there somewhere. My team is moving into position, but we need real time. Intelligence from someone who understands this terrain. Sarah lifted the scope and immediately understood why it was so heavy. The optics were incredible, revealing details in the rock formation she'd never noticed, despite 4 years of regular observation. She could see tiny ledges, narrow channels between the rocks, places where a small boat could potentially hide. There, she said, adjusting the focus. There's a narrow inlet about 40 yards south of where I lost sight of them. The opening is barely visible from water level, but there's definitely space for a 30-foot vessel. Marcus spoke into his radio again, relaying her observations with military precision. When he finished, he looked at her with something approaching respect. Good eye, Dr. Chun. My satellite imagery didn't catch that inlet. Sarah continued scanning, getting more comfortable with the advanced optics. The scope revealed a hidden world she'd never fully appreciated. Tiny caves, underwater passages, places where the rocky coastline created natural camouflage. It was like discovering that her familiar research site had secret rooms she'd never known existed. There's movement, she said suddenly. In the inlet. Something dark, maybe human-sized. Marcus moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and understated. How many? Hard to tell. The angle is difficult, but I see at least 2 figures. They're moving with purpose, not like tourists exploring. Keep watching. Tell me everything you see. Sarah adjusted the scope's focus, trying to get clearer detail. The figures were definitely human, dressed in dark clothing, moving between the rocks with the kind of careful coordination that suggested training. They're carrying equipment. Bags, maybe weapons. It's hard to tell from this distance. Marcus's radio crackled with voices. Sarah couldn't understand military jargon and coded communications that sounded like a foreign language. When the chatter died down, Marcus looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Dr. Chun, I need you to understand that what happens next could be dangerous. My team is about to move in, and these people won't surrender quietly. Sarah lowered the scope, suddenly aware that she'd become part of something much larger and more serious than she'd ever intended. Maybe I should leave. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Actually, Marcus said quietly, I need you to stay. The words hung in the morning air like a challenge Sarah wasn't prepared to accept. Stay? She was a marine biologist, not a federal agent. Her biggest daily decision usually involved which tide pool to examine first, not whether to remain in what was apparently becoming a combat zone. I don't understand, she said, though part of her suspected she understood all too well. Marcus pulled out a second device. This one definitely military hardware. The screen showed a detailed topographical map of the coastline, complete with real-time tracking dots that Sarah assumed represented his team members. My people are good, Dr. Chun, but they're approaching from the water. They don't have the vantage point you have here. More importantly, they don't have your knowledge of the specific terrain. Sarah watched the dots moving across the screen like pieces on a chessboard. There were 6 of them, approaching the rocky outcropping from 3 different directions. Professional, coordinated, clearly experienced in this type of operation. Surely you have other spotters, people trained for this kind of thing. We do. But they're not here, and time is critical. Marcus touched something on his earpiece, listened for a moment, then looked back at her. The people in that inlet aren't just hiding, Dr. Chun. They're waiting for something. A signal, a delivery, we're not sure. But intelligence suggests they won't wait much longer. Through the advanced scope, Sarah could see more activity in the hidden inlet. The figures she'd spotted earlier had been joined by others, and they were definitely unloading equipment from the boat. Heavy cases, electronic devices, something that looked disturbingly like weapons. What exactly are they planning? That's what we're here to prevent. Marcus adjusted his radio settings, and Sarah could hear fragments of communication between his team members. Professional, calm voices reporting positions and observations. The short version is that these people have been tracked across 3 states. They're not environmental activists or drug smugglers. There's something much more dangerous. Sarah felt her scientific curiosity warring with her survival instincts. The researcher in her wanted to understand, to gather data, to observe and document. The part of her that preferred laboratory work to field work was screaming to leave immediately. Dangerous how? Marcus hesitated, and Sarah realized he was making calculations about how much to tell her. They have access to materials that could cause significant civilian casualties. The kind of materials that require federal response at the highest levels. The implications hit her like a cold wave. Terrorist materials, chemical weapons, explosives, The peaceful morning she'd planned for whale observation had somehow become ground zero for a national security operation. And you think they're going to deploy whatever they have from down there? We know they are. The question is when and where. Marcus pointed to a spot on his tactical display. There's a ferry route that passes within 200 yards of that inlet. 300 passengers make that crossing every morning between 7:30 and 8:15. Sarah checked her watch. 7:18 a.m. Less than 15 minutes before the first ferry of the day would enter potential danger. Can't you just contact the ferry company, cancel the runs? Already done. But there are private boats, Coast Guard vessels, research ships like yours that use these waters regularly. We can't evacuate the entire bay. Marcus looked at her directly, and she saw something in his expression that made her stomach tighten. That's why we need to end this before they're ready to act. Through the scope, Sarah watched the figures below moving with increased urgency. Whatever they were preparing, it was clearly approaching completion. What do you need me to do? Keep watching. Report everything you see. My team needs real-time intelligence as they move in. Marcus handed her a military-grade radio, smaller and more sophisticated than her research equipment. Channel 7. Just describe what you observe, exactly as you would document whale behavior. Sarah clipped the radio to her belt, surprised by how natural it felt. And if something goes wrong? Then you document that too. Marcus checked his sidearm, a gesture so casual it was clearly second nature. Dr. Chun, I need you to understand something. My team is very good at what they do, but this kind of operation always involves variables we can't control. Your position up here, your knowledge of this coastline, could make the difference between success and catastrophe. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like a lead blanket. Sarah had spent her career studying creatures that lived according to predictable patterns, following migration routes established over millions of years. This was the opposite of predictable. How do you know you can trust me? Marcus smiled. For the first time since she'd met him, a brief expression that transformed his entire face. Because you've been asking the right questions. Someone planning to help our targets would be asking very different things. Through the radio, Sarah could hear Marcus's team reporting their positions. They were close now, moving through the water with what sounded like extraordinary stealth. She lifted the scope again, scanning the inlet for any sign that the targets had detected the approaching federal agents. Movement, she reported into the radio. 2 figures near the boat, handling what looks like electronic equipment. Something with cables, possibly detonation devices. Marcus translated her observation into military terminology, speaking rapidly into his own communication device. Sarah realized she was becoming part of a carefully orchestrated operation, her civilian observations being transformed into tactical intelligence. More activity, she continued. Someone's climbed up to a higher position in the rocks. They have what looks like surveillance equipment. Scanning the water. Marcus tensed. Direction of scan? Sarah adjusted the scope's focus, trying to get a better view of the figure's equipment. Northeast, toward the main shipping channel. They're definitely watching for something specific. The radio crackled with urgent communications. Marcus's team had been spotted, or at least suspected. The careful stealth approach was about to become something much more direct and dangerous. Dr. Chun, Marcus said quietly, I need you to move to a different position. There's a concrete observation bunker about 50 yards east of here, left over from World War II coastal defenses. Better protection, better angle on the inlet. Sarah looked in the direction he indicated and saw what appeared to be a moss-covered mound sheet. Walked past hundreds of times without really noticing. I never knew that was there. Most people don't. It's camouflaged to look like natural terrain. Marcus was checking his equipment now, preparing for immediate action. Take the scope. Take the radio. Keep reporting what you see, but from a Position where you can't be targeted if this goes sideways. The word targeted sent ice through Sarah's veins. Until that moment, she'd been thinking of herself as an observer, safely removed from whatever was happening below. The realization that she might actually be in danger transformed everything. Targeted by who? Marcus was already moving, heading down a narrow path that led toward the waterline. By people who don't want witnesses, Dr. Chen. People who consider civilian casualties an acceptable cost of doing business. Sarah grabbed her research bag and the equipment Marcus had given her, moving quickly toward the hidden bunker. As she reached the camouflaged entrance, she turned back to ask another question. But Marcus had disappeared into the fog as silently as he'd appeared. Through the radio, she could hear voices becoming more urgent, more tense. The operation was accelerating, moving from careful surveillance to active engagement. Sarah settled into the concrete bunker, surprised by how well preserved it was, and lifted the scope to continue her observations. What she saw in the inlet made her blood run cold. The figures below weren't just preparing some kind of attack. They were preparing multiple attacks with sophisticated timing devices and what looked like enough explosive material to take out far more than a single ferry. This wasn't a terrorist cell planning a limited strike. This was something much larger, much more devastating, and somehow she'd become the primary intelligence source for the federal agents trying to stop it. The concrete bunker smelled of decades-old dampness and salt air, but its thick walls provided an unexpected sense of security. Sarah positioned herself at the narrow observation slit, adjusting the scope to get the clearest possible view of the unfolding situation below. What she could see through the advanced optics made her hands shake despite her efforts to remain calm. The terrorist cell, because that's clearly what they were, had transformed the hidden inlet into a sophisticated operations center. Multiple timing devices were connected to what appeared to be enough plastic explosives to level a city block. But worse than the quantity was the precision of their setup. These weren't amateurs planning a crude bombing. This was military-grade demolition work, executed with the kind of expertise that suggested serious training. Base, this is Observation Point Alpha, Sarah spoke into the radio, using the call sign Marcus had quickly assigned her. I count at least 4 separate explosive devices, professionally rigged. They're using timer systems with what looks like remote backup detonation capability. Marcus's voice crackled through the radio immediately. Can you determine the intended targets? Sarah swept the scope across the inlet, trying to piece together their plan from the positioning and orientation of the devices. Negative unspecific targets, but the placement suggests they're planning multiple simultaneous detonations. The devices are positioned to maximize structural damage to the rock formation itself. A pause, then Marcus's voice again, more urgent. Structural damage? Dr. Chun, are you suggesting they're planning to bring down part of the cliff face? The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd been thinking in terms of boat attacks, maybe targeting the ferry or other vessels. But if they brought down sections of the rocky outcropping, the debris would create a massive underwater obstacle in one of the busiest shipping channels on the West Coast. Ships would run aground. The environmental damage alone would be catastrophic. Affirmative. They're not planning to attack boats directly. They're planning to create a permanent navigational hazard, possibly close the shipping channel entirely. Through the radio, Sarah could hear Marcus coordinating with his team, voices becoming more clipped and professional as the situation escalated. She continued her observations, documenting everything with the same methodical precision she used. For marine research. Additional personnel emerging from the boat, she reported. I count 6 individuals now, all armed. They're moving with military precision, establishing what looks like a perimeter defense. That's when she saw him. Marcus was approaching from the water side, moving between the rocks with extraordinary stealth. Even with the advanced scope, Sarah almost missed him as he used the natural camouflage of the cliff face to advance on the terrorist position. But she wasn't the only one who'd spotted him. One of the sentries raised what looked like an assault rifle, taking aim at Marcus's position. "Base, you have a shooter targeting your approach from the northeast," Sarah transmitted urgently. "Armed. Individual, elevated position, approximately 30 yards from your location." Marcus's response was immediate and professional. "Confirmed. Can you maintain overwatch?" "Overwatch." Sarah realized she'd become more than an observer. She was now providing tactical support for a federal anti-terrorism operation, using skills she didn't know she possessed. "Affirmative, I have. A clear line of sight to your entire approach route." What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. The sentry who'd spotted Marcus began moving to a better firing position. Through the scope, Sarah could see other team members responding to hand signals, repositioning themselves for what was clearly about to become a firefight. The peaceful morning she'd planned for whale research had become the opening moments of a combat engagement. "Multiple targets moving to defensive positions," she reported. "They know you're coming." Marcus's voice remained calm despite the circumstances. "Dr. Chun, I need you to switch to Channel 9. You're about to become our primary intelligence asset for this operation." Sarah changed radio channels and immediately heard a much more complex communication network. Multiple voices, military call signs, tactical updates flowing back and forth with the kind of precision that spoke of extensive training and experience. She was no longer talking just to Marcus. She was plugged into the entire federal response team. "Observation Alpha, this is Team Leader," a new voice said through the radio. "We need continuous updates on target positions and movements. You are now our eyes on the objective." The weight of responsibility was overwhelming. Sarah had gone from documenting whale migration patterns to providing intelligence that could determine whether a terrorist attack succeeded or failed. Through the scope, she watched Marcus and his team moving into position, their lives potentially dependent on the accuracy of her observations. 6 targets confirmed, she reported. 4 working with explosive devices, 2 in overwatch positions. The boat appears to have additional equipment, possibly more weapons or explosives. Understood, Observation Alpha. Can you determine the timeline for their operation? Sarah focused on the timing devices visible through her scope. The LED displays were too small to read specific numbers, but the urgency of the terrorists' movements suggested they were working against a deadline. Negative on specific timeline, but their activity level suggests imminent deployment. That's when everything changed. Marcus emerged from cover, moving with the fluid precision of someone trained for exactly this type of situation. But instead of engaging the terrorists directly, he began climbing towards Sarah's position, with movements so economical and silent, they seemed almost supernatural. The terrorists below noticed his absence from their perimeter immediately. Shouts in what sounded like a foreign language echoed off the rock walls as they realized one of their targets had vanished. Through the scope, Sarah watched them searching frantically, weapons raised, scanning every possible hiding spot. Minutes later, Marcus appeared at the bunker entrance, breathing hard but moving with the same controlled urgency she'd observed all morning. Without a word, he began unpacking what looked like a rifle case she hadn't noticed him carrying. "Dr. Chun," he said quietly, assembling what was clearly a precision sniper rifle with practiced efficiency, "I need you to understand that this situation has just escalated beyond anything we anticipated." Sarah watched him work, fascinated despite her fear by the mechanical precision of his movements. Every action was deliberate, economical, clearly the result of extensive training. "What do you mean?" Marcus completed his rifle assembly and moved to the observation slit, taking a position that gave him a clear line of sight to the inlet below. "My team has identified additional explosive devices. What you observed was just the beginning. They're planning to bring down multiple sections of the cliff face, creating a debris field that would close this shipping channel for months. The scope of the attack was staggering. Sarah had been thinking in terms of immediate casualties, but the economic and environmental impact of closing a major shipping channel would affect millions of people. How many ships use this route? Approximately 40% of West Coast maritime commerce. Marcus adjusted his rifle scope, making minute corrections with the precision of a master craftsman. If they succeed, the economic damage alone would be in the billions. Through her observation scope, Sarah could see the terrorists below making final preparations. Whatever timeline they were working against, it was clearly approaching. There. Moving faster now. Connecting final cables, checking timing devices. Marcus settled into a shooting position, his rifle aimed at the terrorist position below. Dr. Chun, I'm going to ask you to do something that goes completely against your training and instincts. Sarah felt ice forming in her stomach. What? Marcus looked at her directly, his pale blue eyes completely serious. I need you to take this rifle. The words didn't compute. Sarah stared at him, certain she'd misunderstood. I'm sorry, what? My team needs me down there for the final assault. But we can't leave this position undefended, and we can't lose our overwatch capability. Marcus gestured toward the scope she'd been using. You have the best vantage point, the best equipment, and you've already proven you can provide accurate intelligence under pressure. Sarah's hands were shaking now, not from fear but from the sheer impossibility of what he was suggesting. I'm a marine biologist. I study whales. I've never fired a weapon in my life. Marcus began explaining the rifle's operation with the same calm professionalism he'd shown all morning. Safety here, trigger here. The scope is already zeroed for this distance. Point, breathe, squeeze gently if you need to protect yourself. Or provide cover for my team. This is insane, Sarah whispered. Marcus stood up, checking his sidearm and other equipment. Dr. Chun, in about 10 minutes, my team is going to assault that position. If those terrorists have prepared fallback positions or escape routes we haven't identified, people are going to die. Your observations from this position could save lives. He moved toward the bunker exit, then paused. I'm not asking you to become a soldier. I'm asking you to continue being a scientist. Observe, document, report. The rifle is just ... additional equipment. And then he was gone, leaving Sarah alone in the concrete bunker with a sniper rifle and the weight of an entire anti-terrorism operation on her shoulders. The concrete bunker smelled of decades-old dampness and salt air, but its thick walls provided an unexpected sense of security. Sarah positioned herself at the narrow observation slit, adjusting the scope to get the clearest possible view of the unfolding situation below. What she could see through the advanced optics made her hands shake despite her efforts to remain calm. The terrorist cell, because that's clearly what they were, had transformed the hidden inlet into a sophisticated operations center. Multiple timing devices were connected to what appeared to be enough plastic explosives to level a city block. But worse than the quantity was the precision of their setup. These weren't amateurs planning a crude bombing. This was military-grade demolition work, executed with the kind of expertise that suggested serious training. Base, this is Observation Point Alpha, Sarah spoke into the radio, using the call sign Marcus had quickly assigned her. I count at least 4 separate explosive devices, professionally rigged. They're using timer systems with what looks like remote backup detonation capability. Marcus's voice crackled through the radio immediately. Can you determine the intended targets? Sarah swept the scope across the inlet, trying to piece together their plan from the positioning and orientation of the devices. Negative on specific targets, but the placement suggests they're planning multiple simultaneous detonations. The devices are positioned to maximize structural damage to the rock formation itself. A pause, Then Marcus's voice again, more urgent. Structural damage? Dr. Chun, are you suggesting they're planning to bring down part of the cliff face? The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd been thinking in terms of boat attacks, maybe targeting the ferry or other vessels. But if they brought down sections of the rocky outcropping, the debris would create a massive underwater obstacle in one of the busiest shipping channels on the West Coast. Ships would run aground. The environmental damage alone would be catastrophic. Affirmative. They're not planning to attack boats directly. They're planning to create a permanent navigational hazard, possibly close the shipping channel entirely. Through the radio, Sarah could hear Marcus coordinating with his team, voices becoming more clipped and professional as the situation escalated. She continued her observations, documenting everything with the same methodical precision she used. For marine research, additional personnel emerging from the boat, she reported. I count 6 individuals now, all armed. They're moving with military precision, establishing what looks like a perimeter defense. That's when she saw him. Marcus was approaching from the waterside, moving between the rocks with extraordinary stealth. Even with the advanced scope, Sarah almost missed him as he used the natural camouflage of the cliff face to advance on the terrorist position. But she wasn't the only one who'd spotted him. One of the sentries raised what looked like an assault rifle, taking aim at Marcus's position. Base, you have a shooter targeting your approach from the northeast, Sarah transmitted urgently. Armed. Individual, elevated position, approximately 30 yards from your location. Marcus's response was immediate and professional. Confirmed. Can you maintain overwatch? Overwatch. Sarah realized she'd become more than an observer. She was now providing tactical support for a federal anti-terrorism operation, using skills she didn't know she possessed. Affirmative, I have. A clear line of sight to your entire approach route. What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. The sentry who'd spotted Marcus began moving to a better firing position. Through the scope, Sarah could see other team members responding to hand signals, repositioning themselves for what was clearly about to become a firefight. The peaceful morning she'd planned for whale research had become the opening moments of a combat engagement. Multiple targets move into defensive positions, she reported. They know you're coming. Marcus's voice remained calm despite the circumstances. Dr. Chun, I need you to switch to Channel 9. You're about to become our primary intelligence asset for this operation. Sarah changed radio channels and immediately heard a much more complex communication network. Multiple voices, military. Call signs, tactical updates flowing back and forth with the kind of precision that spoke of extensive training and experience. She was no longer talking just to Marcus. She was plugged into the entire federal response team. Observation Alpha. This is Team Leader, a new voice said through the radio. We need continuous updates on target positions and movements. You are now our eyes on the objective. The weight of responsibility was overwhelming. Sarah had gone from documenting whale migration patterns to providing intelligence that could determine whether a terrorist attack succeeded or failed. Through the scope, she watched Marcus and his team moving into position, their lives potentially dependent on the accuracy of her observations. 6 targets confirmed, she reported. 4 working with explosive devices, 2 in overwatch positions. The boat appears to have additional equipment, possibly more weapons or explosives. Understood, Observation Alpha. Can you determine the timeline for their operation? Sarah focused on the timing devices visible through her scope. The LED displays were too small to read specific numbers, but the urgency of the terrorists' movements suggested they were working against a deadline. Negative on specific timeline, but their activity level suggests imminent deployment. That's when everything changed. Marcus emerged from cover, moving with the fluid precision of someone trained for exactly this type of situation. But instead of engaging the terrorists directly, He began climbing towards Sarah's position with movements so economical and silent. They seemed almost supernatural. The terrorists below noticed his absence from their perimeter immediately. Shouts in what sounded like a foreign language echoed off the rock walls as they realized one of their targets had vanished. Through the scope, Sarah watched them searching frantically, weapons raised, scanning every possible hiding spot. Minutes later, Marcus appeared at the bunker entrance, breathing hard but moving with the same controlled urgency she'd observed all morning. Without a word, he began unpacking what looked like a rifle case she hadn't noticed him carrying. "Dr. Chun," he said quietly, assembling what was clearly a precision sniper rifle with practiced efficiency, "I need you to understand that this situation has just escalated beyond anything we anticipated." Sarah watched him work, fascinated despite her fear by the mechanical precision of his movements. Every action was deliberate, economical, clearly the result of extensive training. "What do you mean?" Marcus completed his rifle assembly and moved to the observation slit, taking a position that gave him a clear line of sight to the inlet below. "My team has identified additional explosive devices. What you observed was just the beginning. They're planning to bring down multiple sections of the cliff face, creating a debris field that would close this shipping channel for months." The scope of the attack was staggering. Sarah had been thinking in terms of immediate casualties, but the economic and environmental impact of closing a major shipping channel would affect millions of people. How many ships use this route? Approximately 40% of West Coast maritime commerce. Marcus adjusted his rifle scope, making minute corrections with the precision of a master craftsman. If they succeed, the economic damage alone would be in the billions. Through her observation scope, Sarah could see the terrorists below making final preparations. Whatever timeline they were working against, it was clearly approaching. They're moving faster now. Connecting final cables, checking, timing devices. Marcus settled into a shooting position, his rifle aimed at the terrorist position below. "Dr. Chun, I'm going to ask you to do something that goes completely against your training and instincts." Sarah felt ice forming in her stomach. "What?" Marcus looked at her directly, his pale blue eyes completely serious. "I need you to take this rifle." The words didn't compute. Sarah stared at him, certain she'd misunderstood. "I'm sorry, what?" "My team needs me down there for the final assault. But we can't leave this position undefended, and we can't lose our overwatch capability." Marcus gestured toward the scope she'd been using. "You have the best vantage point, the best equipment, and you've already proven you can provide accurate intelligence under pressure." Sarah's hands were shaking now, not from fear but from the sheer impossibility of what he was suggesting. "I'm a marine biologist. I study whales. I've never fired a weapon in my life." Marcus began explaining the rifle's operation with the same calm professionalism he'd shown all morning. "Safety here, trigger here. The scope is already zeroed for this distance. Point, breathe, squeeze gently if you need to protect yourself or provide cover for my team." "This is insane," Sarah whispered. Marcus stood up, checking his sidearm and other equipment. "Dr. Chen, in about 10 minutes, my team is going to assault that position. If those terrorists have prepared fallback positions or escape routes we haven't identified, people are going to die. Your observations from this position could save lives." He moved toward the bunker exit, then paused. "I'm not asking you to become a soldier. I'm asking you to continue being a scientist. Observe, document, report. The rifle is just ... additional equipment." And then he was gone, leaving Sarah alone in the concrete bunker with a sniper rifle and the weight of an entire anti-terrorism operation on her shoulders. The silence that followed the gunfire was more unsettling than the combat itself had been. Sarah kept the rifle scope trained on the inlet below, watching for any movement among the scattered terrorist positions. But What she saw was the methodical work of Marcus's team securing the area with professional efficiency. Bodies were being checked, weapons collected, explosive devices carefully examined by what appeared to be a bomb disposal specialist who had materialized from somewhere. Through her radio, she could hear the controlled chatter of a successful operation winding down. Casualty reports, none among the federal team. Evidence collection protocols, requests for additional technical support to safely disarm the remaining explosive devices. The language of aftermath, clinical and precise, designed to transform chaos back into order. But Sarah couldn't stop staring through the scope at the two men she had killed. The controller operator lay where he had fallen, his body twisted among the rocks in a position that looked uncomfortable even in death. The RPG operator had collapsed near the water's edge, waves now lapping at his boots with each surge of the tide. Two human beings who had been alive and breathing and making decisions 15 minutes ago, now reduced to tactical problems that needed to be processed by federal investigators. Eagle's Nest, this is team leader, the voice came through her radio. Situation is secure. Outstanding work on precision fire support. You can stand down. Stand down. Sarah carefully engaged the rifle's safety, set the weapon aside, and realized her hands were shaking again. Not from fear this time, but from the delayed shock of what she had just done. She had taken two human lives with the clinical precision she usually reserved for documenting whale behavior patterns. And the most disturbing part was how natural it had felt in the moment. Marcus appeared at the bunker entrance 20 minutes later, moving with the same controlled urgency she had observed all morning. But now she could see traces of combat stress in his expression. A small cut on his cheek, mud on his clothing, the particular alertness of someone who had just survived a firefight. "Dr. Chun," he said, settling into the bunker beside her. "How are you holding up?" Sarah looked at him, then at the rifle, then back toward the inlet where federal agents were still processing the scene. "I killed 2 people. You prevented a terrorist attack that could have killed hundreds of civilians and caused billions of dollars in economic damage," Marcus followed, her gaze toward the bodies below. "Those weren't innocent bystanders, Dr. Chun. They were armed terrorists who would have completed their mission if you hadn't acted." The rational part of Sarah's mind understood the logic of his words. The controller operator had been seconds away from detonating charges that would have brought down sections of cliff face. The RPG operator had been preparing to fire on federal agents. Her actions had been tactically sound, morally justified, legally defensible. But understanding the logic didn't change the fact that she had looked through a telescopic sight, placed crosshairs on another human being, and squeezed a trigger with the specific intent to end a life. "How do you process something like this?" she asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the Pacific Ocean where normal morning activities were continuing, completely unaware of what had just transpired. A few hundred yards away, fishing boats heading out for the day, early commuters crossing the bay on ferries that now had no idea how close they had come to sailing into a disaster zone. "The first time is always the hardest," he said finally. "You keep replaying it, wondering if there was another way, trying to reconcile the person you thought you were with the person you discovered you could become when circumstances demanded it." Sarah realized he was speaking from experience, probably extensive experience. "How many times have you?" "More than I like to count, less than the job sometimes requires." Marcus turned to look at her directly. "But I've never seen anyone adapt to extreme circumstances as quickly as you did today. Most civilians would have frozen or panicked or simply refused to engage. You performed like someone with years of tactical training." "I was terrified the entire time." Being terrified and being effective aren't mutually exclusive. Some of the best operators I've worked with were terrified during every engagement. Marcus gestured toward the scope she had been using. Terror kept you focused, made you careful, ensured you didn't take unnecessary risks. Fear can be a tool if you know how to use it. Through the radio, Sarah could hear requests for additional federal resources. FBI evidence teams, ATF explosives. Specialists, Coast Guard vessels to secure the water approaches. What had started as a routine morning of whale observation was becoming a major federal investigation that would probably make national news. What happens now? She asked. Marcus checked his tactical radio, coordinating something with his team before answering. Now you get debriefed by people with much higher security clearances than mine. Your actions today were critical to preventing a major terrorist attack, which means you're going to become very important to some very serious federal investigators. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning fog. Am I in trouble? Quite the opposite. You're going to be offered opportunities you never imagined. Marcus began breaking down his equipment with the same methodical precision he had shown in assembly. The kind of opportunities that come with security clearances and federal employment and work that most people never know exists. The implications were staggering. Sarah had spent 4 years building a career in marine biology, developing expertise in whale migration patterns, planning a quiet life of academic research and environmental conservation. Now Marcus was suggesting that single morning had opened doors to an entirely different kind of existence. What if I just want to go back to studying whales? Marcus smiled, but there was something sad about the expression. Dr. Chun, you just demonstrated capabilities that maybe one person in 10,000 possesses. The ability to remain calm under extreme pressure, to process complex tactical information rapidly, to make life or death decisions with precision and follow through with action. Do you really think the federal government is going to let someone with those abilities go back to counting whale migrations? Through the bunker's observation slit, Sarah could see helicopters approaching from the south. Federal aircraft, moving with the purposeful speed of major incident response. Whatever bureaucratic machinery her actions had set in motion, it was arriving with impressive efficiency. Those helicopters are carrying people who are going to want to understand exactly what happened here today. Marcus continued, they're going to want detailed debriefings, psychological evaluations, background investigations. They're going to want to know everything about Dr. Sarah Chen, marine biologist turned precision marksman. Sarah watched the helicopters circling the area, obviously looking for suitable landing zones near the scene. And then what? And then they're going to offer you a job. Marcus finished packing his equipment and stood up. The kind of job that comes with hazard pay, extensive training, and missions you can never talk about with anyone who doesn't have the appropriate clearances. The idea was simultaneously terrifying and oddly appealing. Sarah had always been drawn to challenges that required patience, precision, and careful observation. The skills that made her effective at marine research had apparently translated directly to tactical operations. But the thought of leaving behind everything she had worked for, everything she had planned for her future, was overwhelming. What if I say no? Marcus paused at the bunker entrance. Dr. Chun, in my experience, people who discover they have these capabilities find it very difficult to go back to normal life. Knowing what you're capable of, knowing that there are situations where your actions could save lives, tends to change how you see everything else. He was right, and Sarah knew it even as he spoke the words. She could try to return to her research, to her quiet morning observations of whale migration patterns, but she would always know that somewhere there were federal operations that needed someone with her particular combination of skills. She would always wonder about the missions she wasn't participating in, the lives that might be lost because she had chosen academic safety over operational engagement that the helicopters had found landing zones and were beginning to discourage passengers. Federal agents in tactical gear, investigators carrying equipment cases, officials whose bearing suggested significant authority within whatever agencies they represented. The bureaucratic response to a successful counter-terrorism operation. Arriving to document and process and transform her actions into official reports. Dr. Chun, Marcus said before leaving the bunker, I want you to remember something during the interviews and evaluations that are about to begin. What you did today wasn't just tactically sound, it was morally correct. Those men were planning to cause massive casualties and economic destruction. You stopped them with precision and restraint, using exactly the minimum force necessary to neutralize the threat. Sarah nodded, though she wasn't sure she fully believed his words yet. The moral calculus of taking human life even justified. Human life would probably take much longer to process than the tactical aspects of her actions. There's something else, Marcus added. The rifle I left with you was zeroed for someone much taller than you are. Your shots were adjusted for height and wind conditions instinctively, without any training in ballistic compensation. That's not a skill you can teach easily. It's something you either have or you don't. With that observation, he disappeared. From the bunker entrance, leaving Sarah alone with the weight of his words and the approaching sound of federal investigators making their way up the hill toward her position, she looked one final time through the scope at the scene below. Federal agents were carefully documenting every detail, photographing evidence, preparing the kind of thorough investigation that would probably reconstruct the entire morning's events with scientific precision. Her morning routine of whale observation had become the subject of a major federal case study, but as she watched the methodical work of crime scene processing, Sarah realized something that surprised her. She wasn't thinking like a marine biologist observing from a distance anymore. She was thinking like someone who understood tactical operations, someone who could see the larger patterns and implications of what had transpired, someone who had discovered capabilities she never knew she possessed. The sound of boots on gravel announced the arrival of the federal investigation team. Sarah carefully set aside the rifle scope, straightened her clothing, and prepared to explain to some very serious government officials how a morning of whale research had become a precision sniper operation that prevented a major terrorist attack. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she was already wondering what other challenges might require someone with her particular combination of scientific training and unexpected tactical abilities. The transformation was complete, even if she didn't fully realize it yet. Dr. Sarah Chun, marine biologist, had become something entirely different during the space of a single morning. The only question now was whether she would have the courage to embrace what she had discovered about herself. The federal agents were climbing the hill toward her position, and Sarah found herself analyzing their approach with the same systematic attention she had once reserved for whale behavior patterns. Some changes, she realized, were irreversible, and perhaps that wasn't entirely a bad thing. The federal debriefing facility in downtown San Francisco looked like any other government office building from the outside. Beige concrete, tinted windows, the kind of architectural anonymity designed to discourage curiosity. But inside, Sarah discovered a world she had never imagined existed. Secure conference rooms with sophisticated electronic countermeasures, investigators who spoke in acronyms she didn't recognize, technology that seemed decades ahead of anything she'd encountered in academic research. 3 days had passed since the morning that changed everything. 3 days of interviews, psychological evaluations, background investigations so thorough they had apparently contacted her third-grade teacher. Sarah sat in conference room 7 Alpha, facing a panel of federal officials whose titles suggested they represented agencies she had only heard about in movies. Deputy Assistant Director Jennifer Walsh from the FBI's Counterterrorism Division. Colonel Michael Torres from an organization he had identified only as Defense Intelligence. Dr. Amanda Foster from what appeared to be a psychological evaluation unit that operated without any visible departmental affiliation. And at the end of the table, Marcus Wade, now wearing a suit that transformed him from tactical operator to federal bureaucrat. Dr. Chun, Director Walsh began, consulting a file that seemed impossibly thick for someone whose federal involvement had begun exactly 72 hours earlier. We've completed our preliminary assessment of the incident at Point Reyes. Your actions prevented what our analysts estimate would have been a catastrophic attack with significant civilian casualties and economic impact. Sarah nodded, still processing the surreal nature of her situation. A week ago, her biggest concern had been whether her research funding would be renewed for another year. Now she was receiving briefings from federal officials about prevented terrorist attacks. The explosive devices recovered from the scene were sophisticated enough to bring down substantial sections of the cliff face. Colonel Torres added, the resulting debris field would have closed the main shipping channel for months, with economic losses in the billions. Conservative estimates suggest your intervention prevented the largest domestic terrorist attack since September 11th. The weight of those words settled over the conference room like a heavy blanket. Sarah had understood intellectually that the terrorist attack would have been significant, but hearing the specific scale of destruction they had planned made her actions feel simultaneously more important and more terrifying. Dr. Foster consulted her own notes before speaking. More interesting from our perspective is how you adapted to extreme circumstances with no relevant training or experience. Your psychological profile suggests someone completely unsuited for tactical operations, yet you performed with precision that suggests natural aptitude for high-stress decision-making. What exactly does that mean? Sarah asked. It means, Marcus said, speaking for the first time since the meeting began, that you have capabilities most people don't possess. The ability to remain calm under extreme pressure, to process complex tactical information rapidly, to make life or death decisions with precision and follow through with decisive action. Director Walsh leaned forward, her expression becoming more serious. Dr. Chun, we didn't bring you here just to thank you for your service to the country. We brought you here because we have a proposition. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. She had suspected this moment was coming, had been preparing for it since Marcus first suggested that her actions would attract federal attention. But preparation and reality were very different things. What kind of proposition? The kind that comes with a significant salary increase, extensive training opportunities, and work that most people never know exists, Colonel Torres replied. We're offering you a position with a joint task force that handles situations similar to what you experienced at Point Reyes. The offer hung in the air like a challenge Sarah wasn't sure she was prepared to accept. You want me to become some kind of federal agent? We want you to become exactly what you already proved you could be, Dr. Foster said. Someone who can provide critical intelligence and precision tactical support in situations where traditional law enforcement approaches aren't sufficient. Sarah looked around the conference room, taking in the faces of people who had clearly spent their careers in worlds she had never imagined. And if I say no, then you return to your marine biology research with our gratitude and a security clearance that prevents you from discussing anything about the Point Reyes incident, Director Walsh replied. Your life goes back to normal, more or less. More or less. Marcus answered that question. Dr. Chun, people who discover they have these capabilities often find normal life insufficient, knowing what you're capable of, knowing that there are situations where your actions could save lives, tends to change how you see everything else. Sarah understood what he meant. Even during the 3 days of debriefings and evaluations, she had found herself analyzing situations differently, watching for potential threats, assessing escape routes, thinking about tactical implications of ordinary circumstances. The peaceful routine of academic research felt like something from her past rather than her potential future. What would the work actually involve? She asked. Colonel Torres opened another file, this one marked with security classifications Sarah was learning to recognize. Counterterrorism operations, hostage rescue support, Precision engagement in situations where diplomatic or traditional law enforcement solutions have failed. Essentially, you would become a specialized asset for situations that require someone with your particular combination of analytical skills and tactical adaptability. How often would I be shooting people? Dr. Foster consulted her psychological evaluation notes. Based on historical patterns for similar positions, direct engagement occurs in approximately 15% of operational deployments. Most of your work would involve intelligence gathering, reconnaissance, and providing overwatch support for other federal assets. 15%. Sarah tried to process what that meant in practical terms. If she accepted their offer, if she committed to this new existence they were proposing, she would probably kill again. Multiple times. The thought should have been horrifying, but she found herself analyzing it with the same clinical detachment. She applied to research problems. "There's something else you should understand," Director Walsh added. "The terrorist cell you helped neutralize was part of a larger network. Our investigation has identified connections to similar groups operating in other coastal areas. What happened at Point Reyes wasn't an isolated incident. It was a test run for something much larger. The implications were staggering." Sarah had been thinking of the morning's events as a single incident, a random encounter with terrorism that had been successfully resolved. Now they were telling her it was part of an ongoing threat that required continued federal response. "How much larger?" she asked. "Large enough that we need people with your capabilities working full-time to prevent future attacks," Colonel Torres replied. "The techniques they used, the sophistication of their planning, suggests we're dealing with an adversary that requires our most specialized assets." Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. "Dr. Chun, I want you to understand what they're really offering you. This isn't just a job change. It's a complete transformation of your life. New identity, extensive training, missions you can never discuss with anyone outside the intelligence community. Once you accept, there's no going back to whale research." The weight of permanent change hung over the conference room like fog. Sarah had spent years building expertise in marine biology, developing professional relationships, creating a life centered around academic research and environmental conservation. Accepting their offer would mean abandoning all of that for an existence she couldn't even fully imagine. But as she sat in the sterile government conference room, surrounded by federal officials who dealt with threats most people never knew existed, Sarah realized something that surprised her. The idea of returning to her old life felt less like safety and more like a kind of death. She had discovered capabilities she never knew she possessed, had proven herself effective in situations that mattered in ways whale research never could. What kind of training would be involved? She asked. Dr. Foster smiled for the first time. During the meeting, 6 months of intensive preparation. Weapons training, tactical operations, intelligence analysis, psychological conditioning for high-stress environments. Essentially, we would transform your natural abilities into professional-level skills. And after the training? After the training, Director Walsh said, you become one of the most valuable assets in the federal counter-terrorism arsenal. Someone with scientific training, analytical capabilities, and proven tactical effectiveness under extreme pressure. Sarah looked at Marcus, who had been watching her carefully throughout the entire conversation. What's your recommendation? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, clearly choosing his words carefully. Dr. Chun, I've worked with a lot of people in high-stress tactical situations. Most of them required years of training to develop the kind of instinctive decision-making you demonstrated at Point Reyes. You have something that can't be taught, something that could save a lot of lives in the right circumstances. And in the wrong circumstances? In the wrong circumstances, you go back to studying whales and spend the rest of your life wondering what you might have accomplished if you'd been brave enough to embrace what you discovered about yourself. The challenge in his words was unmistakable. Sarah had always been drawn to difficult problems that required patience, precision, and careful analysis. The work they were offering would certainly provide all of those elements, along with stakes higher than anything she had ever encountered. In academic research, "I need to ask something," Sarah said finally. "The rifle you left with me at Point Reyes, you said it was zeroed for someone much taller. How did you know I would be able to compensate for that?" Marcus exchanged glances with the other officials before answering. "Dr. Chun, your background investigation revealed that you spent summers during college working with your uncle's hunting guide business in Montana. You have experience with precision shooting, even if you haven't used those skills in recent years." Sarah stared at him, realizing the implications of his words. You knew I could handle the rifle before you left it with me." "I suspected you might have relevant experience," Marcus admitted. "But suspecting and knowing are very different things. What you accomplished at Point Reyes went far beyond anything your background suggested was possible." The revelation that her selection hadn't been entirely random changed everything. Sarah had been thinking of herself as an accidental participant in the morning's events, someone who had been thrust into circumstances beyond her control. Now she understood that Marcus had made a calculated decision based on information about her background, and she had almost forgotten herself. "So this wasn't entirely coincidental," she said. Director Walsh shook her head. "Dr. Chun, federal agencies don't rely on coincidence when national security is at stake. We've been aware of your background for some time, though we had no intention of recruiting you until circumstances at Point Reyes demonstrated your operational potential." Sarah felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Her consistent schedule at the research site, Marcus's detailed knowledge of her routine, the sophisticated equipment that had been readily available. She hadn't stumbled into a federal operation by accident. She had been identified as a potential asset long before the terrorist threat materialized. "How long have you been watching me?" "Long enough to know that you represent exactly the kind of specialized capability our current threat environment requires," Colonel Torres replied. "Someone with advanced analytical training, proven ability to function under extreme stress, and tactical instincts that suggest natural aptitude for precision operations." The federal officials were offering her a chance to become something she had never imagined possible. Someone who could make a difference in situations that mattered on a national scale, who could prevent attacks that would cause massive casualties and economic devastation. But accepting would mean abandoning the life she had built and embracing an existence defined by secrecy and violence. Sarah looked around the conference room one final time, taking in the faces of people who had dedicated their careers to protecting national security. Then she looked at Marcus, who had trusted her with a rifle and seen capabilities in her that she hadn't known existed. "When would the training begin?" she asked. Director Walsh smiled. "As soon as you're ready, Dr. Chun. Welcome to a very different kind of marine environment." As Sarah signed the papers that would transform her from Dr. Sarah Chun, marine biologist, into something the federal government classified as a specialized tactical asset, she realized that Marcus had been right about one thing: some changes were irreversible, and perhaps that wasn't entirely a bad thing. 6 months later, Agent Sarah Chun completed her final training exercise with scores that impressed even her most demanding instructors. The woman who had once spent quiet mornings documenting whale migration patterns had become someone capable of precision operations in the world's most dangerous situations. The whales would have to migrate without her careful documentation. There were more urgent matters requiring her particular combination of scientific training and tactical precision. And somewhere in the Pacific, new threats were already developing that would require exactly her kind of specialized response. 18 months after Point Reyes, Agent Sarah Chun crouched behind a concrete barrier on a rooftop in downtown Seattle, watching through her scope as another federal operation unfolded in the streets below. The rain that defined the city created a natural camouflage, blurring the lines between buildings and making her nearly invisible against the urban landscape. But tonight wasn't about invisibility. Tonight was about precision. The terrorist cell they were tracking had learned from the failures at Point Reyes. Instead of isolated coastal locations, they had moved their operations into crowded urban environments, where federal response would be complicated by civilian presence. Instead of single location attacks, they were planning coordinated strikes across multiple targets. And instead of relying on timer-based explosives, they had developed real-time communication networks that allowed for instantaneous coordination between separate attack teams. Sarah adjusted her position slightly, maintaining perfect sight lines on 3 different building entrances where intelligence suggested the terrorists would emerge for their coordinated assault on the Seattle Federal Building, the Space Needle, and Pike Place Market. Simultaneous attacks designed to maximize casualties and create the kind of spectacular destruction that would dominate international news coverage. Her earpiece crackled with the controlled chatter of a federal task force that had grown to trust her capabilities completely over the past year and a half. Overwatch, this is Team Leader. Report status on all primary targets. Overwatch has clear sightlines on all 3 objectives, Sarah replied, her voice carrying the calm professionalism that had become second nature. No movement detected at any primary locations. Recommend maintaining current positions until targets commit to emergence. Through her scope, Sarah could see Marcus leading one of the assault teams positioned near the federal building. In the months since Point Reyes, he had become something between a partner and a mentor, someone who understood both the tactical demands of their work and the psychological challenges of transitioning from civilian life to operational reality. Tonight, his team was responsible for the highest priority target, the one most likely to involve direct combat. But Sarah's role had evolved far beyond the intelligence gathering and precision fire support that had defined her early missions. The federal agencies that employed her had discovered that her scientific training translated into tactical planning capabilities that complemented her marksmanship skills. She could analyze complex urban environments the way she had once studied marine ecosystems, identifying patterns and predicting behaviors that traditional tactical training often missed. Team 2, this is Overwatch, she transmitted, watching. A suspicious vehicle approached the Space Needle area. I have a dark sedan moving toward your secondary position. License plate matches one of our target vehicles. Recommend increased alertness. The response was immediate. Copy, Overwatch. We have eyes on the vehicle, maintaining observation. Sarah had learned to think in terms of complex systems where individual actions created cascading effects throughout the entire operational environment. The terrorist attacks they were preventing had become more sophisticated, requiring federal responses that combined traditional tactical operations with the kind of analytical thinking she had developed through years of academic research. Tonight's operation was particularly complex because intelligence suggested the terrorist cell had developed new communication protocols that would allow them to coordinate their attacks in real time, adjusting targets and timing based on federal response patterns. Stopping them required a level of tactical sophistication that pushed the boundaries of conventional law enforcement capabilities. Movement at Target Alpha, Sarah reported, focusing her scope on the federal building area. 3 individuals emerged from the parking structure, moving with purpose toward the main entrance. All appear to be carrying concealed equipment. Marcus's voice came through immediately. Confirmed visual on 3 hostiles. Preparing for engagement on your mark, Overwatch. This was the moment Sarah had learned to recognize the transition from surveillance to active engagement, where split-second decisions would determine whether the operation succeeded or failed catastrophically. Through her scope, she could see the 3 terrorists moving with military precision toward the federal building entrance, clearly prepared to begin their coordinated attack. But something was wrong with the pattern. Sarah had spent enough time studying terrorist operational methods to recognize when behavior didn't match established patterns. The three individuals approaching the federal building were moving too openly, too obviously. Real terrorists planning a major attack would use more sophisticated concealment methods. "Team leader, this is Overwatch," she transmitted urgently. "Something's wrong with the approach pattern at Target Alpha. Recommend extreme caution before engagement." "Explain," Marcus replied, his team now positioned for immediate assault. Sarah swept her scope across all three target locations, looking for the pattern that was bothering her. "The approach at Target Alpha is too obvious. Real terrorists wouldn't expose themselves completely. I think we're looking at decoys." Through her earpiece, she could hear Marcus coordinating with other team leaders, processing her tactical assessment, and adjusting their operational plans accordingly. In the 18 months since Point Reyes, the federal task force had learned to trust her pattern recognition capabilities even when they contradicted traditional tactical assumptions. "If Target Alpha is a decoy operation," Marcus transmitted, "where are the real targets?" Sarah began a systematic scan of the surrounding area, applying the same methodical observation techniques she had once used for marine research. But instead of looking for whale behavior patterns, she was searching for human activities that didn't fit normal urban rhythms. "There," she said, focusing on a construction area 6 blocks from the federal building. "Maintenance vehicles that arrived after normal working hours. Personnel moving equipment that doesn't match standard construction patterns. I think we're looking at the real target location." The implications were staggering. If the terrorists had established a decoy operation at the federal building to draw federal response away from their real target, they were demonstrating tactical sophistication that went far beyond anything intelligence agencies had previously attributed to domestic terrorist cells. "Team 3, redirect to construction site 6 blocks northwest of Target Alpha," came the immediate command. "Overwatch, maintain observation on all locations until we can confirm target disposition." Sarah watched through her scope as federal teams began repositioning, moving with the kind of coordinated precision that had become routine over the past year and a half. But even as she tracked the tactical redeployment, part of her mind was analyzing the larger implications of what they had discovered. The terrorist cell they were pursuing had evolved beyond the crude planning that had characterized the Point Reyes attack. They were now capable of sophisticated deception operations designed to exploit federal response patterns, which meant future attacks would require even more complex countermeasures, even more specialized analytical capabilities. "Overwatch, this is Team 3, came a new voice through her earpiece. "We have confirmed terrorist activity at the construction site. Multiple individuals, sophisticated equipment. Appears to be preparation for major structural demolition." Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her stomach that preceded direct engagement. Through her scope, she could see the federal teams moving into assault positions around the construction site, but the terrorists had chosen their location well. Multiple escape routes, civilian traffic patterns that would complicate pursuit, building structures that provided natural defensive positions. "Team leader, this is Overwatch," she transmitted. "I have Overwatch capability on the construction site, but limited sightlines due to building interference. Recommend coordination with Team 3 for precision fire support if needed." Marcus's response was immediate. "Understood, Overwatch. Maintain current position and provide intelligence updates as the situation develops." What happened next unfolded with the controlled chaos Sarah had learned to expect from complex urban operations. The terrorists at the construction site had detected a federal approach and were attempting to accelerate their timeline, working frantically to complete whatever demolition they had planned. But they had also activated defensive positions that transformed the entire area into a combat zone. Muzzle flashes from the construction site, Sarah reported. The hostiles are engaged with Team 3. I count at least 6 separate firing positions. Through her scope, she could see federal agents taking cover behind vehicles and construction equipment, returning fire with professional precision while attempting to advance on the terrorist positions. But the terrorists had established offensive positions that provided excellent cover and multiple fields of fire. Overwatch, we need precision fire support on hostile positions, came the urgent request from Team 3. We have federal personnel pinned down, and casualties are possible if we can't neutralize the defensive positions. Sarah adjusted her scope, calculating angles and distances with the expertise she had developed through 18 months of intensive training and operational experience. The construction site was at the extreme range of her position, requiring compensation for wind conditions and building interference that would challenge even her advanced capabilities. Team 3, I have limited sightlines due to range and obstruction, she replied. But I can provide precision fire on specific targets if you can designate priority positions. The coordination that followed demonstrated how completely Sarah had integrated into federal tactical operations. Team 3 began designating specific terrorist positions using military terminology that had become second nature to her, while she calculated ballistic solutions that would allow her to provide effective fire support despite the challenging urban environment. Priority target is the sniper position on the crane, approximately 400 meters from your location, came the designation. Hostiles has elevation advantage and are preventing our advance. Sarah located the target through her scopa. Terrorist with what appeared to be a precision rifle, positioned on a construction crane that provided him commanding views of the entire federal approach. Neutralizing him would allow the ground teams to advance, but the shot required compensation for multiple variables that pushed her capabilities to their limits. She settled into her firing position, controlling her breathing and calculating wind, drift, bullet drop, and the slight movement of the crane in the evening breeze. The shot was technically possible, but it would require perfect execution under combat conditions. Sarah squeezed the trigger. Through her scope, she watched the terrorist on the crane collapse, his rifle falling to the construction site below. The precision shot had removed the primary threat preventing federal advance, allowing Team 3 to begin their assault on the remaining terrorist positions. Target neutralized, she reported. Team 3 is clear to advance. The federal assault that followed was swift and professional, with the remaining terrorists either surrendering or being neutralized through coordinated team action. But as Sarah watched the operation conclude successfully, she realized something that had been building throughout her 18 months of federal service. She was no longer the marine biologist who had accidentally become involved in a terrorist incident at Point Reyes. She had become exactly what Marcus and the federal recruiters had seen in her, a specialized tactical asset capable of precision operations in the most challenging circumstances. Someone who could analyze complex situations, make life or death decisions under extreme pressure, and execute actions that saved lives on a national scale. Excellent work, Overwatch, Marcus transmitted as the federal team secured the construction site. Your pattern recognition prevented a major terrorist attack, and your precision fire support enabled successful resolution with minimal federal casualties. Sarah began breaking down her equipment with the methodical precision that had become routine, but her mind was already analyzing the broader implications of what they had accomplished. The terrorist cell they had neutralized tonight was more sophisticated than previous groups, suggesting an escalating threat environment that would require increasingly specialized federal responses. As she packed her equipment and prepared to leave the Seattle rooftop, Sarah reflected on how completely her life had changed since that morning at Point Reyes when she had been trying to study whale migration patterns. The woman who had once found excitement in documenting marine behavior now found purpose in preventing Terrorist attacks that could kill hundreds of innocent people. The transformation had been more complete than she could have imagined. Agent Sarah Chun bore little resemblance to Dr. Sarah Chun beyond physical appearance and underlying analytical capabilities. She had become someone who thought in terms of tactical operations rather than academic research, someone who measured success in lives saved rather than papers published. And as she made her way down from the Seattle rooftop, already receiving briefings about the next mission that would require her specialized capabilities, Sarah realized that she had never been happier or more fulfilled in her life. The whales could migrate without her careful documentation. There were more urgent matters requiring her particular combination of scientific training and tactical precision. And somewhere in America, new threats were already developing that would require exactly her kind of specialized response. Marcus met her at street level, his expression showing the satisfaction of another successful operation. "Outstanding work tonight, Sarah. Your pattern recognition saved this entire operation." "Just applying scientific methodology to tactical problems," she replied, but she was smiling as she said it. "Ready for the next one?" Marcus asked. Sarah looked up at the Seattle skyline, where normal people were going about their evening routines completely unaware of the terrorist attack that had just been prevented. Somewhere in the city, families were having dinner, students were studying, workers were heading home from late shifts. All of them safe because a former marine biologist had learned to apply scientific precision to the business of stopping people who wanted to kill innocent civilians. Always, she said. Agent Sarah Chun had found her calling. And the country was safer because of it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.